In the penthouse suite, I met Donald again. When we entered the room, he grabbed each of us tightly in a hug and kissed each one of us without asking permission. He was wearing pajamas. A bodyguard was also present. He asked me about my job as an adult film star, about details on shooting porn, and he also asked us about our personal relationships and whether we were married or single. We answered his questions. It felt like an interview. About 30 or 45 minutes later, we left his room.
There you have it, another woman publicly accusing Donald Trump of inappropriate sexual contact. Jessica Drake is the 11th woman to publicly accuse Trump of unwanted sexual advances. In a statement, the Trump campaign had this to say: Mr. Trump does not know this person, does not remember this person, and would have no interest in ever knowing her. This is just another attempt by the Clinton campaign to defame a candidate who just today is number one in 3 different polls. Well, this comes the same day the Republican nominee laid out his plans for his first 100 days in office if elected. Coincidence? Let's bring in our United States political panel to discuss those controversial comments from Trump. Louisa Savage of Politico and Paul Brandis of West Wing Reports join me today from Washington. Louisa, let me start with you and the latest news. 9, 10, 11 women. Does it matter at this point?
I think the thing that matters is that he's already on tape bragging about this kind of behavior. So trying to go out and litigate an individual woman's story and say it wasn't true or it was is almost beside the point when he's talked about exactly this kind of thing, how he can walk up to any woman and kiss her because he's famous. So, I mean, I think that a lot of this is baked in. People are going to the polls already. Early voting has started. There's been an uptick in women voting, and he's not doing well with women. So I'm not sure whether the incremental woman coming forward does anything more than just keep establishing a certain pattern of behavior.
Paul, Jessica Drake comes out with her accusation the same day as he does his closing arguments. Coincidence?
Well, when there's enough women to field a football team, I don't think it's a coincidence. I mean, this appears to be happening on a daily basis. And as Louise has said, I mean, Trump has a record on tape going back years talking about these kind of things. So, no, I don't think it's a coincidence. I mean, the fact that he went to Gettysburg, if there's any such thing, by the way, as sacred ground in America, it's Gettysburg, the pivotal turning point of the Civil War, where Lincoln gave probably the most consequential words ever spoken by an American president. And Trump goes there trying to invoke Lincoln's name, talking about sort of comparing himself to him. Beyond the pale in my view, but his supporters seem to disagree.
Well, you know, it's interesting because also there he addressed these allegations by these women. Let's take a look at what he had to say in Gettysburg yesterday about that.
Every woman lied when they came forward to hurt my campaign. Total fabrication. The events never happened. Never. All of these liars will be sued after the election is over.
Paul, what do you think? Smart strategy or not?
Look, the polls show, Carol, that he is being crushed with women. They are turning away from him in huge numbers, huge as he might say. So continuing to attack them, threatening to sue them is not exactly how he's going to bring more women into his camp. It's simply too late. So no, I think it's a poor strategy, and it sort of reflects his broader problem of relitigating the past, picking unnecessary fights with people, and not focusing on what he really has to do. We've been talking about this for months now. The main thing that Trump has to do is explain to Americans in positive terms what he wants to do with the country, where he wants to go, and he has to appeal to voters with a sense of faith and optimism and hope. I'm not sure, I'm not convinced that these things are part of his DNA. This is what he does. He fights with people, he picks on people, he tries to humiliate, bluff, and intimidate, and I just don't think that's a winning strategy. And the numbers, the polling certainly appears to back that up.
Okay, let's take a closer look at that speech of Trump's yesterday, the one where he laid out the first 100 days of his presidency and what that would look like, away from the intimidation factor, if you will. What did you think of the so-called closing speech, Louisa?
Well, I think there are several elements in it that should be big winners for him in this anti-establishment election year. When he talks about, as he puts it, cleaning up the swamp of Washington, when he talks about putting restrictions on lobbyists, on White House officials who turn around and lobby for foreign countries, all this stuff should be resonating in this particular year where people are just fed up with the way Washington works. Trump's problem is he then couples that with these very harsh words about building a wall and forced deportations. That doesn't play well with the general public. It plays well with a subsegment of his supporters, but not overall. And he steps on it by making his strong remarks about suing these women. They're all liars and so forth. And as we know, we'll take it seriously when we see a lawsuit. He also threatened to sue the New York Times earlier for defamation, and that got laughed at by the New York Times lawyer in a very acidy return letter. But he has certain elements that he could be focusing on, and they just get drowned out by the rest of the noise of his campaign.
Yeah, one of the things I noticed about it and listening to is between pulling out of climate change agreements, wall building, starting up coal mines, ripping up free trade agreements, renegotiating them into fair trade. Trump America, Paul, seems very isolationist.
Well, by the way, he threatened to sue the New York Times and has not done so. He seems to make bluffs and threats, and then, he doesn't really follow through. I think it's worth pointing out. I don't think he's going to sue these women at all. He says he's been libeled, and the truth is the best defense against a libel. Now, as to your question, Carol, about sort of an isolationist America, that's one reason why sort of these elder statesmen in the Republican Party, past administrations going all the way back to the Nixon era 40 years ago, have turned their backs on him, talks about, not so much pulling the plug on NATO, but getting them to allegedly pay up. He talks about possibly allowing Japan, Saudi Arabia, others, South Korea, to get nuclear weapons. Really alarming things. So for someone who talks about wanting to make America great again, this talk about kind of pulling back, sort of to a 1930s kind of isolationism that we saw just before World War II, it simply doesn't wash. I think most people seem to think that would make America more vulnerable, not less. And Trump, by the way, has made statements in the past. There's an editorial that was uncovered a couple of days ago that he actually wrote maybe 3 or 4 years ago, where he talked about America's need to engage with the rest of the world and trade and have ideas and commerce and so forth flowing across borders, quite the opposite of what he's talking about now.
Okay, Louisa, what's your take on his policies?
Well, the isolationism, I don't think Trump invented that, and I don't think it's going to go away with Trump. You heard the same kinds of sentiments from Bernie Sanders. Hillary Clinton has picked up a lot of this kind of rhetoric, talking about how she won't support the TPP, for example. There's a lot more skepticism toward trade. You just saw the inability of Canada and the EU to reach an agreement, in part because of regional concerns. So this is not just limited to Trump, and it won't go away the day after the election. There's a lot of skepticism about America's role in the world and in the Middle East after all these years, and so many people died in Iraq and Afghanistan, and the feeling that it's somehow not getting better. So he is certainly tapping into very real feelings in the country. He just seems to be a flawed candidate who can't sort of move beyond his own problems to be an effective spokesman for those concerns. But I think the Republican Party is going to have two very different wings that will be fighting for power after this, the more isolationist wing and the pro-free trade globalist big business wing that has dominated in the past, but not now.
Speaking of after the election, Donald Trump stoked controversy this past week over whether or not he'd accept the results of the election, using the term rigged. It's all rigged, were he to lose. His statement suggests a number of possibilities.
I'm not looking at anything now. I'll look at it at the time.
I will totally accept the results if I win.
I would accept a clear election result.
Okay, coming up, our panel gives us their thoughts on Trump's comments and whether they're helping or hurting his White House ambitions.
One of the prides of this country is the peaceful transition of power, and that no matter how hard fought a campaign is, that at the end of the campaign, that the loser concedes to the winner. Not saying that you're necessarily going to be the loser or the winner, but that the loser concedes to the winner and that the country comes together in part for the good of the country. Are you saying you're not prepared now to commit to that principle?
What I'm saying is that I will tell you at the time. I'll keep you in suspense.
Okay, that was the headline from the debate, the most talked about moment of Wednesday's debate and the implications of that. Donald Trump refusing to say he would accept the results of the November 8th election if he lost. Statements at a subsequent rally appeared to open up a couple of new possibilities depending on the results of the vote.
I will totally accept the results of this great and historic presidential election if I win.
Of course, I would accept a clear election result, but I would also reserve my right to contest or file a legal challenge in the case of a questionable result.
Okay, today, Eric Trump, his son, says his father will 100% accept the results if they are fair. If. Let's bring in our United States political panel to discuss those controversial comments from Trump. Louisa Savage of Politico and Paul Brandis of West Wing Reports, both joining me live from Washington. Paul, let me begin with you this time. How damaging was Trump's debate answer for his chances of winning undecided voters, if it was damaging at all?
Well, we have had several contested presidential elections in American history going all the way back to 1800. The most recent one, of course, was in 2000, the famous George W. Bush, Al Gore debacle that dragged on for about 5 weeks. So it's not exactly unheard of. The reason why Trump is saying this, I think he's clearly laying the groundwork for a defeat. The numbers simply at this point are not lining up for him. He is behind in all but about 2 swing states. So the only way to make it really beyond the shadow of a doubt is for Clinton to really run up the score here and really crush him. That would really move the margins beyond anything that would be could possibly be reasonably contested. Yeah. So nevertheless, I'm not quite sure what he is going to do, but I think Michelle Obama had a good comment in reaction to that. She said, "You don't keep American democracy in suspense." Even in the cases in the past that I've mentioned, when the losers lost after whatever the fight was, they all came out and gave a very graceful and conciliatory speech and said, okay, I now accept the results. We're Americans. We have to come together and work for the common good of the country. I'm simply not convinced that that is within Donald Trump's DNA. I think it's going to be very interesting to watch how he'll react.
Especially when you look at Reuters Ipsos poll showing that he appears to be getting a bump from this idea that the system, that the November 8th election is rigged against him. Louisa, do you agree with what Paul has to say, that Hillary Clinton has to crush him to get rid of this idea?
Well, you know, it's interesting you raised the poll. The polls have been a little bit all over the place, and the thing that's concerning is that the pro-Trump news outlets are only making reference to polls that show that he's ahead. And there are only a few of those polls, and there are many polls that show that Hillary Clinton is far ahead. So if you're reading that coverage and you're a Trump supporter and you think that Trump is ahead in the polls, and then you see Hillary Clinton win, you might think the system is in fact rigged. I think that there's a big contrast in my mind between Bush v. Gore and that whole debacle in 2000 and the idea that the system is rigged. What happened in 2000 was a very, very close election which triggered in Florida an automatic recount because the law says if the numbers are so close, you recount to make sure you're correct. And then there was an issue of some of the ballots not being able to be read by machines, and should there be a recount by hand? And that went through the courts all the way to the Supreme Court. And in the end, the court ruled against Al Gore, and Al Gore accepted it. Nobody at the time said, well, the system is rigged against me. It was just going through the proper legal process and working out the details. So I find that very different from saying the whole system is rigged, it's a criminal enterprise. It's like he's taking this establishment critique that he has of Washington, that many people have, but just taking it a step too far. If you look at the way the election system is run, it's run at the state and county level. It's a lot of these states are run by Republicans, but there's Republican and Democrats who are involved in overseeing the elections. There's been no evidence of any widespread voter fraud. People who've looked at it have found a small number of in-person voter fraud. A wife, for example, casting a ballot for a husband who recently died to reflect his wishes, that sort of thing. There are many false registrations, but that doesn't mean there are people who actually show up on voter day to falsely vote. So he just hasn't provided any evidence for these very broad and sweeping claims, and I think they're dangerous. I think if you look around the world, it's not the elections that make the democracy, it's the institutions and the faith in the institution, whether it's the free press, the electoral system, or the justice system. And I regret that Donald Trump has tried to undermine the American judiciary, the faith in the electoral system, and the faith in free press. And I think that's what's really bothersome about these comments.
Has he, Paul, I'll get you to weigh in on this, has he undermined it, or has he tapped into a suspicion that was already there?
Well, I think probably both. I mean, polls do show that there's record levels of distrust towards Washington, record levels of distrust to the media. So it's natural red meat for Trump to come out and say that these institutions are corrupt. But there's a big disconnect here that has always bothered me, Carol, and that is this entire campaign talks about, Trump talks about making America great again, while at the same time really trashing the very pillars of our democracy. It's very disturbing, talking about how the press is out to get him, and it's corrupt, and Congress is corrupt. Everyone is corrupt and out to get him who doesn't support him. I mean, it's really reflective of this vast paranoia and, frankly, insecurity that he has. But the fact that he talks every day about making America great again, that's his big thing, while undermining, again, the very pillars of our democracy. I'm not sure whether he or, frankly, his supporters are aware of the long-term damage they are doing to our image and our confidence, not just here at home, but around the world, where people, I think, call me naive, but I think people around the world still look to the United States as a country of opportunity and hope and things that their country might not have. Trump has really done a really dangerous and disingenuous job in this campaign of really tearing all of that down. And it's going to go on for a long time after he's gone. He's done an awful lot of damage.
You know what also strikes me about this campaign is that during the last historic campaign, we were talking about the potential of the first black president of the United States. And there were numerous stories at this time during the campaign, 2 weeks out, about what African Americans were thinking and how wonderful it would be. Where is the celebration, I ask you, of the potential of a first woman president and how historic and wonderful that would be in the United States? I don't see the same enthusiasm for the historical nature of this election. Louisa.
Well, I think that's really interesting. I've remarked the same thing too, and it's not, what's interesting about this election is that what's rallying women is not the prospect of the first woman or of Hillary Clinton. What's rallying women right now is just anger about the way Trump talks about women and treats women, and the sort of belittling and objectifying of women. So I think women have actually been rallied by this election campaign. It's just not the way people expected that they would be. I don't know if it's just taken for granted that there'll be a first woman, or whether Hillary Clinton is just not a woman that inspires other women for a variety of reasons. But that hasn't been the dynamic in this election, the idea that it's a historic first woman president. That hasn't really been the driving force, it seems. You're right.
Paul, what do you think?
I think that's probably true, and the fact that no matter who wins this election, and at this point in time it certainly appears that Clinton is going to win, she is going to come into office seen by maybe 45% of the country, perhaps a little bit more, as kind of not a legitimate person because of the nasty tone of this campaign, all of the stuff that has come out against her. And a lot of her problems, by the way, and it's fair to point out, have been of her own making. I mean, it's undeniable. So she's going to have a lot of fence mending to do, assuming she wins. And all presidents have always had this sort of so-called honeymoon period for a couple of months where things are good and there's hope and optimism. I think that may be kind of a short-lived thing for her. Over the long run, history will nevertheless show her as the first female president, which is a really big deal. It might not, I think that may get lost in the shadows, though, of all the nastiness and mud that's been thrown around. I agree.
All right. Well, we'll see what's going to happen in the next couple of weeks. We'll leave it there for now. Paul Brandis of West Wing Reports and Louisa Savage of Politico in Washington, thank you for joining me.
Thank you.
Thank you.